Please feel free to heckle. I was kind of looking forward to a bit more protest or something, but it's a bit tame. Anyhow, the topic of Catholicism, which is a good release, it always catches your eye. People are not indifferent to that. But I would like, since we are living in a postmodern world, in a postmodern campus, to take a few different perspectives on this issue of Catholicism as good or evil. Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Harry Potter and Hermione marry into the Weasley family. And I'd like to take the perspectives of Harry and of Hermione in a discussion between them about the Weasleys, because given that this is a postmodern point of view, so I can say whatever I want, I think the Weasleys are Catholic. The Malfoys say of them that they have more children than they can afford. They're Irish, they're red-haired, so I'll say that they're Catholic. And the issue arises then when Hermione wants to marry Ron and Harry with Ginny is, well, the wedding. I mean, that's always a big thing. Where are we going to have the wedding? Who's going to do the wedding? Should we have the wedding in a Catholic church? Now, for Harry, that's not a problem, but for Hermione, she's a woman of principle, this is. Am I getting myself into something evil here? This Catholic church. And she remembers very well from her study of history, with the ghost coming in and floating in and teaching them about goblin revolutions and revolts and all the rest, that, people such as Hypatia, I don't know if any of you have heard of Hypatia. No one's heard of Hypatia. So a real-life figure, real-life person from Alexandria at the time of the early church fathers. Now, she was set upon by a crowd, and depending on which account you read, torn apart with seashells. She was a very clever mathematician, Neoplatonic philosopher, and floozy of the governor of the day. So it depends which of these reasons you might wish to attribute to why the crowd, a Christian crowd, set upon her and ripped her to shreds. In folklore, we like to talk about it as though, maybe she was like an enlightened pagan or enlightened witch or something like that, because it was the rumours circulating around her influence in her. She was a very beautiful woman too. It seems more like that it had a lot more to do with politics and her relationship to the governor of the time. It's a bit complicated. But still, Hermione has heard of Hypatia and what they studied at that time. Also, you might want to look at the Crusades. Think for a moment of the sack of Jerusalem, when the Crusaders finally took the Holy City. Have you guys heard about that? A few, maybe. I mean, according to the accounts, the streets were rivers of blood. So not a very Christian thing to do. You're taking the Holy City and then you just, put everyone to the sword. The Inquisition. The Inquisition. Think about that. You could take the case of the, my French is very bad, so I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Huguenots? Huguenots, the massacre of the Huguenots. Rumoured that the Pope, when he found out about it, sang a Te Deum. So you think, well, very bad, very un-Christian, very un-Christian. And why not say it? Have any of you ever heard the claim made that millions of witches were put to death by the Inquisition? A few of you heard it? Maybe? A couple? Okay, well, a few. I mean, certainly the Da Vinci Code makes that claim. So, that's serious. And the Quibbler, the Quibbler speaks of millions of witches being executed. Now, Harry thinks about these things and he makes a point to her and says, well, look, the Quibbler, you can't believe everything that you read. Think about the Daily Prophet. Think about, Rita Skeeter. Does everything she writes about us give you a true and fair view of what's going on? Maybe we need to examine the sources a little bit more closely. So even if you just think aloud, if it were true that millions of witches were killed by the Inquisition, that presupposes that there were millions of witches. And if there were millions of witches, there would be a Hogwarts in every town. Would there not? I mean, you're looking at the population of the time and all the rest of it, so it somehow doesn't quite stand up to reason. And when you look at the sources for these things, and you look at the Women's Encyclopedia of whatever, and you go, fine, maybe they've got a slight agenda, perhaps to push, what if I went to Oxford University Press or something that was, peer-reviewed, and what if I actually even went to the records of the Inquisition themselves, which are accessible? You might get a very different story. In fact, it would tell you that the Catholic Church executed very few witches, a couple thousand maybe, I don't know, you can dispute the figures. Certainly where witches were killed, those were in the Protestant Inquisitions. Yes, there were Protestant Inquisitions. There are some very famous cases involving some Dominicans, which Father Don might want to tell us about at some time, where there were, some very enlightened Dominicans who saved a lot of women's lives, in fact, because they had a big witch trial in Logroño. And the Dominican Inquisitor looked into it and said, this is ridiculous, there's no evidence for any of this is all a load of rubbish. All the cases, after a few executions, unfortunately, got cancelled because of his intervention, where he said, look, this is absurd. If you look at the evidence, sometimes it doesn't match the way that people talk about these things. However, still, there are many, many things that you can talk about in the history of 2,000 years which are very bad and look very bad. There's big egg all over the Catholic Church's face. For sure. No doubts about that. And if you look at, Severus Snape and all his slithering companions, I mean, they'll have plenty of little articles because they're intelligent, but they're also nasty, and they love to indulge in schadenfreude, where you laugh at somebody else's expense. And that's something that a number of intellectuals do. But it's the thing, you've got a certain level of erudition, and you can pick up, well, in the 8th century, such and such did such and such to whoever. And you didn't know that, you silly little Catholic. But a true intellectual, a true academic, wants to gain the truth and is prepared to make judgments and sift through things a little bit more carefully. And Harry might say, well, look, doesn't the Church talk about sin? Doesn't the Pope go to confession? So there's no internal contradiction, at least here anyway. I mean, we're the first ones to say, yep, sin, I believe in sin. And there's nothing about the Catholic Church that says any particular individual is going to be automatically a saint. For sure. We have to expect that along with God's grace, there is human freedom. And where those two meet, you have the history of the Church. At this stage, I don't know if I pronounce this correctly, Nagini, the snake of Voldemort, slithers in. And because Harry can speak parcel tongue and all the rest of it, he starts to translate a little bit for Hermione. Nagini has his 2 bobs worth and says the following. He said, well, look, okay, you don't get it. You guys really don't get it. Supposing that all the little Catholics were all little Smurfs or little Avatarian creatures from Pandora, innocence itself, wave of Dumbledore's wand, no sin. You don't realise you've still got an institution, a church, that is telling you what to do. Even if there were no historical problems, the church is still telling you what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong. Where's the autonomy? How can there be God if you yourself are not God? Why would you accept such situation? What about a bit of hubris here? Can you see the point? I don't know whether you can see the point, but even if the church was all wonderful and perfect, and because people say, oh, the church has done this and church has done that, imagine if the church had never done any of those things, but it's still making this claim to say what is right and what is wrong. How dare someone else tell me what to do? The snake. Doesn't that mean that you are immature? Doesn't that make you dependent? Many times, and Harry thinks back now to when he was trying to destroy that Horcrux, which had already been taken. But you remember Dumbledore had to drink that potion and all the skeletons were in the water?